Hi, everybody. This is a nice, intimate group. It's nice to meet all of you. Make sure you stay. I can come around and chat afterwards. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is Hannah. I'm an engagement manager at Planet Mark. Essentially, what that means is I sort of step in when it comes to sort of educating and motivating individuals and organizations around really all things sustainability, just essentially so that they have the tools that they need to sort of move forward and have a positive impact in the world. I'm really pleased to be here today, to officially sort of present this session about developing a sustainability plan, and not only that, but to a group of individuals who share a passion of mine, which is gardening, right? I'm really excited. I think that sort of natural passion for the environment will take us really far on this journey, but I think we probably know all too well that things can definitely get a little bit complex, right? And especially with sustainability, it is complex. And so I think it's going to be really helpful that we take some time to sort of dissect this and break it down into manageable pieces today, right? So I'm going to start with a little introduction about Planet Mark and our work and how we sort of support the Horticultural Trade Association and their members. I will also take a little bit of a step back and just describe, the big picture, why sustainability is important in the first place, right? Just to give some context to this. Then I'll also kind of pull out a few key steps for really any sustainability journey, right? We're going to introduce carbon footprinting. We are going to talk about ways you can engage with your stakeholders, which was great. That actually came up in the last session. It was one of the last questions, and so I'm excited to kind of take that conversation a little deeper. And then what we're going to do is also just talk a little bit around the role that communication plays in sort of wider societal change and how you can sort of build that into your sustainability plans as well. So last but not least, we're also going to point you in the direction of a document that will essentially just sort of help you organize all of this juicy information into really a clear and compact plan, right? So without further ado, I know this session's going to fly by, so I'm just going to dive right in, right? Let's talk about Planet Mark first. So a little introduction. Our sort of mission is empowering change for a brighter future, right? So at our core, Planet Mark is a sustainability certification. We enable organizations of really all sizes to positively transform society, the environment, and the economy through the measurement of their carbon and social data. So our certification recognizes continuous improvement, it encourages action, and it builds an empowered community of like-minded individuals who really can make the world of difference. So we are incredibly proud of our growing community of members. Here's a little look at some of them, right? So together, this collective represents a really powerful force for good. On average, our members are making a 12% reduction in their carbon emissions every year. That did increase over the pandemic up to about 24%, but we know that the pandemic was obviously sort of a unique situation. And excitingly, 98% of our members are actually reaching their targets and they're recertifying with us, right? So hopefully, a few of these sort of logos look familiar, but I actually pulled out a specific slide of the ones that I think might be even more applicable for this audience. So maybe most notably HTA, right? They're front and center. But then we have loads of others here. We've got Nutcuts, the Klondike Group, Squires, Millbrook, Creative Landscaping, Van Hague, Scottsdale, the Gardens Group, Palmstead, St. Peter's Garden Center, Rexley Manor, Muddy Trowel, Tongue Garden Center, Garrisons, and Hillier. Oh my gosh, okay, that's great. Once you name one, you have to name them all. So I had to go through it. Out of curiosity, do any of you guys work for these organizations? No? Do any of you work with these organizations? I know you can raise your hand. Yes, we learned that earlier today. That's brilliant, right? So it's really great to see. I mean, this is my first time at Glee, and so it's been a really great experience to kind of see everybody who is here. And even if there's not necessarily, organizations from these specific businesses here, I can tell that there's going to be a lot of overlap in general. So I think in general, I just kind of wanted to talk about the work that we do to support HTA and their businesses. Essentially, we do our business certification for all of these organizations, including HTA. And on top of that, at various times, and I think specifically within this last year or so, we have also got involved in a lot of sustainability training and workshops for really all HTA members, right? So we had workshops going on earlier this year, which was, it was like a little bit of a series, and it was really successful, and hopefully it's something we'll be doing moving forward. We just feel really privileged to be in the position to support HTA on their sustainability roadmap, and we're so grateful for the opportunity. So thank you to from all of us here at Planet Mark. Now, since we got sort of intros out of the way here, let's actually take a moment to dive into the core content here. Let's talk about the big picture and why sustainability is important, right? I always like to take a little bit of time just to reflect on this, right? We're all coming at this from sort of different experiences, different knowledge levels, and this is really nice, just sort of equalizer. So I always use this photo. This is the Earthrise photo that was taken by the Apollo 8 crew in 1968. It's one of the first photos that we have of our planet from space. And I like it. I actually have this as my desktop photo on my computer. I look at it every day. It's not only, a beautiful reminder of just how gorgeous this little sort of blue floating marble is, but it's a really nice reminder that it is indeed our one home, right? We're kind of surrounded by this black void, and we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to shepherd this beautiful planet. The other interesting thing about this photo is that in about the last 50 years, essentially since this photo was taken, we have catapulted humanity and the planet into a new geological period, right? This is what scientists are calling the Anthropocene. It's a time when human activity are sort of dominating and affecting the very systems that we rely on, right? And this means that we humans are the prime drivers of climate change on this planet. And the reality is that this sort of rapid increase in our control over Earth has brought us to the precipice of catastrophic climate change. Now, climate change, as we may be familiar, is caused essentially by emissions going into the atmosphere. They form a bit of a blanket, right? Heat is trapped inside, and it results in a warming planet. I know that's an oversimplification, but it's fine. We only have 30 minutes to go through this. So what I like as well is I always use this graph because I feel like sometimes we hear this conversation around, well, carbon's naturally occurring, and we've had varying amounts of emissions in our atmosphere throughout time, and that is definitely true. That's essentially what this is sort of indicating is the fluctuating levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide over time, right? And what we're seeing along the right-hand side, however, all of these dips and troughs sort of relate to ice ages, right? And times when sort of life on Earth was flourishing and emissions would go up, and then ice age would happen and emissions would go down. But what we're seeing along the right-hand side here is sort of our more recent history, and what we can see specifically from around that 1950s level is this exponential curve up, right? This is when, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, we started burning immense quantities of fossil fuels, right? And we're essentially seeing this sort of level of atmospheric carbon dioxide that we have never seen before, and it's putting us in a really dangerous position. Now, I know that we are probably all aware of the fact that we are experiencing the effects of climate change, right? Year on year, we set records for Earth's climate, things like record warm surface temperatures, record levels of ocean heat content, et cetera, et cetera. And this manifests as things I know we've seen in the headlines, right? Floods, heat waves, hurricanes, on and on and on. Now, one thing to note, I have a communications background, and so I'm always really sensitive with this slide because I think it is important to illuminate the fact that climate change is happening in the natural environment, but that's not to say that it's only happening to the natural environment, right? It's really important to recognize that climate change has widespread effects, most importantly, actually, on people, communities, and society, right? So just something as a little sort of disclaimer there that I like to include. And we know that the time to act is now, right? We've got a great quote here from Barack Obama. He says, "We are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it." And yes, indeed, the world is definitely mobilizing, right? Individuals at really every level of society, from international leaders to grassroots activists, are stepping up. And one of the sort of very bold steps that has recently been taken here in the UK specifically is the legal requirement to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So I wanted to do a little bit of sort of introducing net zero here. Sorry, I don't know how many clicks it's going to take to get all my text up here. Let's start with that. That's good. So the technical definition, right? Just to be really clear, I know net zero can be super complex. So the technical definition of net zero carbon emissions is that balance between the total greenhouse gas emissions being released into the atmosphere and the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions being removed from the atmosphere annually, right? So it's about this sort of rebalance. Right now, we're releasing a lot more than our natural systems can really cope with. So the reason this is also so important is around this conversation about that sort of 1.5 degrees C. Maybe we've heard that as sort of a little indicator. So this is the level of global warming that the United Nations is essentially trying to protect as set out in the 2015 Paris Agreement, right? This is the level at which the most severe impacts of global warming are avoided. Now, as you've already seen from my other slide, we are already experiencing effects of climate change. We will continue to experience effects of climate change. This is about avoiding the worst of the worst, right? So for organizations like yours, this means that you will need to radically reduce your emissions and also neutralize any residual emissions across your value chains, right? Now, net zero is definitely something that could be a session all in itself. And in fact, we actually have a session next week. If you're curious and want to take a deep dive with us, let me know. I'll link you to that. It's happening, I believe, next Thursday. But for the purpose of today, I'm actually going to bring us a little bit more higher level, right? So great. Our goal, again, is just to sort of help us understand how we can make a plan and really start in on this journey, right? So how we approach this at Planet Mark is through a sort of 3-step process. Here we go. Measure, engage, and communicate, right? So measure, this is all about, your impact, right? We feel very strongly that what we measure matters, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. All of those fun sayings, right? This is what gives you that clear picture of your environmental impacts, and as well as, and equally important, what your contributions to social value as well. So that's really where you have to start, is with this measurement piece. Next, engage. As an engagement manager, this step is naturally very close to my heart. This is about unlocking people's passion and building an organic culture of sustainability from within organizations, right? We believe very strongly that you can have all the technical solutions that you want, but unless you have everyone on board, you're not going to get to where you need to go, right? So that is about sort of engaging all of your team members and driving change from within. Then we get to communicate, and this is all about, sharing successes widely and, also your challenges, sharing your challenges transparently, right? It's about empowering others to do the same and having that broader impact across our industries. So this is going to be, I would say, sort of the foundation of the rest of our session today. And so without further ado, let's dive into this measurement piece, right? This can take many forms. I would be curious to know, does anybody feel like they are currently measuring their environmental impacts for their organizations? Anyone measuring energy, water, waste? It's okay. It's okay. We got to start somewhere. It's all good. All of that really comes into play in this measurement space, right? And like I say, there's so many different sort of categories of things you could measure. And I'm going to talk specifically about measuring carbon emissions, which really does touch on all of those spaces, right? So carbon emissions, essentially every activity, right, whether it's traveling, burning fuel, using electricity, using water, disposing of waste, purchasing goods, right, all of that results in emissions being released into the atmosphere, right? And this is measured using global standards, methodologies, and, emissions factors. And essentially, when you have all of that information and you have sort of like 12 months worth of data, you can then sort of collect all of this and form a really robust sort of baseline carbon footprint, right? Now, there are a few sort of free carbon footprinting services available, but a lot of organizations do like to turn to third-party verifiers in this space. So that's what Planet Mark do, right? Basically, you can just send us all your data, and we will spit out a nice carbon footprint for you. In addition to that, however, because we're a certification, we do hold you accountable for making reduction year on year, so that's very important. So yeah, let us know if that's something we can help you with. What I can say is that this is something, as I mentioned, that we do with HTA and with the members that were on the previous slide, right? And we encourage everybody to be really transparent with this information. And so to use it sort of as an example, we actually brought HTA's carbon footprint with us today. So we can take a look at that and kind of identify what a carbon footprint might look like, right? So here we go. This is it. Let's take a look and just sort of talk through what is on this slide. I know there's a lot. Where to begin? The colorful side or the not so colorful side? So I think where I'll start is actually just with this information that's in the center here. This laser's a little light. So this essentially, oftentimes when you hear organizations talking about their carbon footprint, this is what they mean, right? They mean this sort of total. So for HTA, it's 75.7 TCO2e, stands for tons of CO2 equivalent. And we'll talk about that more later. And although this is helpful for me in this sustainability, carbon world, I can see this number and it really doesn't tell me very much. I need all of this other information to build a full picture of what that really looks like and what that means. So one of the main things, as I've kind of mentioned already as well, is the reporting year, right? Let's talk about some of this information here. So the reporting year, very specifically, this was for 2020. I believe we're in the process of working on their 2021 certification as well. And this is important for a number of reasons. Number one, they have 12 months worth of data. It tells me that it's really robust data set already. Number two, it's recent, recent enough. It's not like data from 2014 or something like that. This is pretty recent, pretty up to date. The other thing that's really helpful and that I really like I really like when organizations are communicating this and talking about that, is that it kind of sends that signal that carbon footprinting is not something that you do once off, you sort of wash your hands and you walk away, right? It's an annual process. It's something that you have to consistently sort of report on. So that's kind of what that indicates there. Then we get the reporting boundary. Again, the more I do these sessions and the more numbers I see in pie charts, the more I realize just how complex businesses are, right? We have head offices, we have storage facilities, we have manufacturing sites, on and on and on and on and on. So what exactly is being included, right? So that is what the reporting boundary tells you, and this is very specific for their sort of head office location. Then we get all of the emissions measured, right? And these are all the different categories that we can then see in this lovely fancy pie chart here. So these include things like business travel, electricity, fleet travel, freight procurement, waste recycling, and water. And this is pretty standard. Actually, this is pretty good, I think, especially for knowing that this is sort of in their first few years of measuring. You know, oftentimes organizations kind of can't necessarily get all this information right away, and they start with just like a few key categories. But I would say as well, what's really interesting is that this balance is very familiar, right? Electricity, as we can see here, taking up about 66% of the total footprint. Very, very common for electricity to have a lot of emissions associated with it. Same with travel. I'm really impressed that their business travel is so low. I know, again, it was 2020, so that is very generally the case. And then we also have fleet travel, which does often come up as well, because that's, you know, your direct impact of burning that fuel. So this can go, you know, on and on, but I would say this is a really good sort of general example. One thing I will make note of, just to give HTA sort of props where props are due, this electricity sort of measurement is a little bit distorted because this is using sort of traditional grid-based beta, which is how we are sort of mandated to report on it, but HTA are actually sourcing renewable energy. So this, when you look at their market-based data, is actually much lower, right? So that's a really good step that they've taken to source renewable energy. So, cool. Now, where I wanted to circle back to here is this sort of TCO2e, tons of CO2 equivalent. It's not always the most accessible metric, right? Like, what does a ton of CO2 look like? So with our organizations, we actually sort of provide this overview as well. Now, the sort of total emissions for them is also equivalent to 68 flights from London to New York. Just a slightly easier way to kind of picture this, right? From a building perspective, that's the electricity specifically. They used enough electricity to power 68 UK homes for 1 year. They traveled once around the world. They produced the same amount of weight as sort of waste that weighs the same amount as 3 London buses. Oh, gosh, sorry. That threw me off. I didn't know there was somebody speaking louder than me. Fab. Can you guys still hear me over that? There we go. Okay. So water, 93 liters of water per day. The paper always surprises me, right? 233 sheets of paper used per day, but that's very common. So essentially, this is just, again, a helpful way to kind of build that full picture. The other metric that's really helpful as well is around this sort of like per employee metric. That tends to be a really good way to kind of benchmark against other organizations as well. The sort of total becomes really difficult to compare between organizations, but oftentimes it's easier to look at that sort of per employee metric. The average is about, in our network at least, is about 5 tons of CO2 equivalent. So again, they're far below average, which is really, really brilliant. So, okay, let me just make sure I know where I'm going here. What's on my next slide? Oh yeah, so essentially, out of curiosity, is anybody measuring their carbon footprint at this point in time? No worries, and that means that this is going to be super useful. So I just wanted to kind of point you in the direction of one of our free guides. You can find it on our website or catch me at the end. I can get your email and send it over to you. It's essentially just a guide that was kind of put together by our CEO and our head of certification introducing carbon footprinting, right? How can you get started on this? Because I know it's complex, and it's a really helpful sort of starting point for breaking things down, right? So, fabulous. The other thing, just to kind of make sort of a touch point on, again, at this point in time, is that just sort of subtle reminder that we are all indeed, at least to some extent, on this journey towards net zero, right? Whether we kind of realize it yet or not. And Planet Mark have done a really great job. As you can see, that sort of 12% annual reduction that I mentioned is a really good trajectory getting our organizations to sort of meet that goal. So if you need support in this space, please consider sort of joining us on this journey. Great. Last point about measurement is just sort of to really acknowledge the fact that Planet Mark, we were sort of founded with the goal of being a complete mark of sustainability, and sort of circling back to that slide where I was talking about the effects of climate change on the natural environment, but also on people and societies. And this is how we capture that, right? So having applied that robust methodology to measuring a business's environmental impacts, we have applied this same approach to valuing the impacts of social activities as well. So this enables members to sort of show a more holistic and truer measure of their contributions to society, right? So just keep that in mind if you're considering working with us as well. Now, okay, on to my favorite part, but I recognize that I am definitely a little bit biased. Engagement, yes. So what we mean by engagement at Planet Mark is essentially to include really every person that you possibly can in on your sustainability journey, right? So most fundamentally, this is your team, your employees, your colleagues, on and on and on. But you will find on this journey that that does tend to be expanded, right, to your customers, to your suppliers, and on and on and on. So by bringing people along with you, I think specifically if you look at your team, bringing them along with you at that point of sort of solutions and problem solving is really just a recipe for success, right? In doing so, you're sort of unlocking talent and passion among your employees, you're encouraging innovation and collaboration, which can be incredibly rewarding, and you're creating ownership and buy-in, right? So this engagement step is crucial in order to create that vast transformational change that's going to be required. So in the context of this session and creating a sustainability plan, I think it's really important to recognize that oftentimes sustainability is assigned to like one key person, right? Can you collect this data? Can you get our reports ready? On and on and on. But the fact of the matter is that it's really hard for just one or two people to drive change across an organization, right? So this is about kind of getting everybody involved. And again, my favorite exercise is just around that sort of brainstorming of solutions, right? There is so much that you can do in this space. And I actually brought some examples with me just because I know this is really always fun to kind of go through. So general guidance, right? General solutions that you guys could be pursuing to make emissions reduction. Things like investing in energy efficient items when it's time to upgrade. LED lights are like a classic example of this. Really, really, really great choice, both environmentally and financially. Switching to a renewable energy tariff, investing in on-site renewable generation where possible, creating a travel hierarchy, right, for your organization to create that culture of sustainable travel, right? We, of course, at Planet Mark, we are realistic. Sometimes travel is required in business to go meet clients and suppliers and on and on and on. But where you do have to travel, what is that company culture, right? Are you allowed to take a first-class flight, or are you encouraged to take public transport, right? Are you encouraged to take a train? Things like that. So creating that sort of policy internally will help sort of make that transition. Other things like, using electric vehicles with your fleet where you can transition to that, that's brilliant. Fitting water-saving fixtures, anything to taps, showers, toilets, checking for leaks and drips, anything around water consumption is really good. Automating heat controls in greenhouses, harvesting, make use of sort of rainwater, and then following the 5 R's, rethink, refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So that's all about, sure, I think we tend to sort of focus on like, let's just not send things to landfill, let's recycle them. But actually, does that stuff need to be disposed of in the first place? Why is that stuff in your sort of supply chain? Can you not just remove all of those things in the first place? Great example of this that I think the world has really rallied around is like, straws, right? Single-use plastic straws. Is it possible that we might not necessarily need those, and can we just remove them altogether? And where we do need them, can we come up with great alternatives, compostable, biodegradable, things like that? So other things, what are the other bullet points I've got here, right? Creating a questionnaire for your suppliers to establish their approach to sustainability and align your purchasing decisions accordingly. If you come to our Net Zero session, we will talk a lot about sort of the scopes of emissions and how this relates to you and your supply chain. And I would say that increasingly, more and more suppliers are going to have pressure put on them. And I think, organizations will be aligning their purchasing with environmentally sort of conscious organizations, right? Other ideas, reassessing hiring procedures and language and handbooks and staff induction material. The woman who was on stage just before me talked about this actually, right? Like, how are you embedding sustainability in your culture? And oftentimes at sort of that first point of contact when a new employee comes into your organization, having something in the sort of handbook is a great sort of touch point on that. Other ideas, participating in campaigns and running competitions. Sustainability doesn't have to be boring. There can be prizes associated with it. It can be fun. You can get your whole team involved. Participating in campaigns, right? Things like Earth Day, things that involve your wider community and can help us learn and grow. Really, 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 really good. So Yeah, I know there's so many ideas in this space. I tried to fit in as many as I could on this slide without making sure you guys could still read it. But this is one of my favorite exercises to do with organizations, is really just sit down, brainstorm these, because involving your staff across your organization, you know, they are your eyes and ears on the ground, right? They're going to be able to look at this list and immediately say, that one works, that one doesn't work, and why, right? They have their finger on the pulse. So make sure that we kind of get them involved, you know, because in addition to, you know, pulling out which ones will work, they're likely going to be the ones who are involved in implementing them as well, right? So it's really helpful from that buy-in perspective if they're involved and, you know, encouraged to participate in this process, right? Okay, so last step, communicate, right? We know that it's not enough to sort of develop change in pockets of isolation, right? We feel very strongly that we need to be sharing our successes and challenges transparently, and by doing so, we will empower others to sort of join us on this journey. So at Planet Mark, we make this really easy for our members. You know, we provide a sort of a whole host of readily available assets that our members can put on their websites and their email signatures. Our certification actually has like a one page that people often like print out and put in their offices. It's really, really brilliant. So I think in addition as well to that power we have over influencing, you know, our industries, the people we work with, you know, we have also this great story to tell, right? Sustainability initiatives are things that both our new and existing customers really like to hear about, right? So it's a great way to engage with them, you know, build that customer trust, attract new business, et cetera, et cetera. I'm conscious as well, you know, with communicating with all of these audiences, there's loads of ways to do this. I've sort of rattled off a few, but I would say just be really conscious of, you know, where you're being consistent with your messaging and also where this messaging lives, right? Is it only on your website or is it on your social media as well? Is it also in your physical spaces, whether that's your offices or your storefronts, et cetera, et cetera? Just make sure that you have sort of a holistic approach to that, and ultimately, all in all, just share far and wide, right? So, okay, I know we've gone through a lot. I talk very fast. I get that a lot. Very energetic and talk very fast. So what I wanted to say is that there are a lot of ways that we can kind of collect all of this as well, right? And I wanted to provide you guys with a document that's going to help you just sort of organize all of this and will help you sort of move forward, right? So it's a rather straightforward template where you can sort of input key focus areas, you can assign responsibilities across your team, and you can ID some short and medium term as well as long term deadlines, right? So this is a document, the sustainability plan, that lies sort of lives within the HTA website for their members, and it's supported by this really great comprehensive guide that they have for it as well, right? It will talk you through how to use the template and on and on. So please go check it out. I would say as well, if you need more support in this space, if you want help writing the plan itself, you know, I think this is actually a snapshot I took from the HTA website in general. So if you have found these documents, this will probably pop up. It's just a really great way for you to connect with Planet Mark as well. We do many sort of workshops in this space. Sustainability plans are very sort of hot topic, and we do these all the time. So yeah, please let us know if we can help you. I think, as you can maybe tell from my energy today, and just in general, we are very passionate at Planet Mark about this stuff, and we believe firmly that businesses are a really powerful force for good. So we would love to support you in this space. Thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon. I suspect I have not actually taken up nearly enough time, but that's fine. We can open it up for some Q&As. I do like to always kind of close off on a positive note, and of course, we are going to use a quote from David Attenborough to do that. Here he says, "We have become the greatest threat to the health of our home, but there is still time for us to address the challenges we've created if we act now," right? So you got this. I know you got this. And if you don't, just reach out to Planet Mark and we can help you, right? So thank you so much. Fab. Lovely. Does anybody have any questions? Because I went fast and I rattled off a lot. And sustainability is very complex. Lovely. I know, we've got a mic.
So. Well,
That's
thank
fine.
you very much. And maybe if people do have questions, they might grab you afterwards.
I'll be over here. Don't worry.
Thanks so much.